a 10-minute presentation again, and you would also have your 15 minutes for questions and answers. Just want to let you know that even from the outset, that we want to ensure that even as we deliberate and we have our questions or we have our comments, we want to establish that from the outset. We're going to do so in a very respectful manner, because obviously there will be differences of opinion. And even though you're passionate about what you're talking about, we want at all times to ensure that we behave in a professional manner and we agree to disagree in an appropriate way. So just to set those parameters right away. And just moving on now to who are the persons whom we have chosen to do this presentation or to have this discussion this evening. First on the list is Mr. Alwyn Adams, and his topic will be education reform in Barbados and the social economic development, educational reform in Barbados and the social economic development, are two sides of the same coin. So who is Alwyn Adams? Alwyn Adams is a retired principal. He was born on August 13, 1943, attended the Coleridge and Paris School from 1995 to 1961. He belongs to that ambitious but restless breed of Barbadians of that era who migrated in search of educational opportunities before coming back better prepared to improve the lot of the Barbadian working class. He is a graduate of the Institute of Education, London University, and has a certificate with merit and a BA with honors. He also holds a Master of Science in Educational Management and Supervision from the University of Miami. He's one of the country's most experienced educators, having taught in Barbados, Britain, and the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. His administrative duties then included acting deputy principal at St. Paul's Methodist College in Bahamas, and also at Christ Church Foundation School. He also served as principal of St. Leonard's Boys School and Coleridge and Parry before retiring in 2007. Mr. Adams was a visiting lecturer at the Regional Police Training Center in Sociology and Effective Communication. He has presented many papers on educational topics, including co-education and the parity of esteem for tech-vought education. He has served as a member of the interviewing panel of the Public Services Commission for the appointment of senior education officers. Mr. Adams is the author of a paper entitled 50 Years of Education in Barbados, in the edited book entitled Barbados 50 Years of Independence, edited by Sir Trevor Carmichael. As a result of his enlightening contributions to education, Mr. Adams was appointed as one of the Governor General's independent senators from 2013 to 2018. He also served as a member of the Christ Church Council of St. James Parish Church, and is also a Justice of the Peace. That is Alwyn Adams. Next, we have Dr. Hyacinth Harris, and her topic will be the transition to secondary level education, possible alternatives. Dr. Hyacinth Harris has enjoyed a career of more than 34 years in education, moving through the ranks from teacher to principal. Prior to being a principal, she was assigned as an education officer acting in the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training. Dr. Harris's career in educational administration began in 2005, when she was promoted to the post of senior teacher in the primary school system. She has also taught at the tertiary level, having been seconded as a tutor at the Earlston Teachers Training College between 2006 and 2007, and having functioned as an adjunct lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill for a period of time. In addition to being a certified teacher, Dr. Harris holds a certificate in educational management and administration with distinction from the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill. Her most recent academic achievement was a Doctor of Philosophy in Educational Planning and Administration, which she completed at the same university. Dr. Harris is the immediate past president of the Association of Public Primary School Principals. She relinquished that post in 2021 and subsequently retired from the Barbados Public Service. Yvette Simmons-Gemont. Her topic will be middle schools, junior academies. Yvette Simmons-Gemont is a devoted and long-standing member of the Barbados Union of Teachers. She has served at various capacities in the teaching profession, including head of department and deputy principal, both at the secondary level. She is retired and has remained committed to serving the teaching profession in Barbados through her work with the BUT, and hence that is why she's here this evening. Ian Marshall, my namesake. His topic will be Schools of Excellence. Ian Marshall is a graduate teacher at the primary level and a Barbados Union of Teachers steward. He has taught both formally and informally for over 20 years, from nursery level to upper secondary. He holds a Bachelor of Arts honors degree and a Master of Arts in History from the University of the West Indies Cayfield campus. He has been an assistant examiner for the CXC for close to 10 years. He's an avid reader, an exercise enthusiast, a Pan-Africanist, a farmer, and a social activist. And now you might add, a person who contributes regularly to the print media. Next, we have Tara Durant. Her topic will be Education Reform and the Educator. Tara Durant has been a teacher for the past 13 years. She prides herself as a culturally diverse individual, and this has enriched her experiences in teaching. In addition to her local teaching experience, she has taught internationally, spending 3 years in Japan teaching at the primary, secondary, and special needs level. We'll probably ask her to speak some Japanese for us a bit later. Currently, Tara teaches at the Irving Wilson School, where she is the Information Technology Coordinator. She is devoted to the educational, social, and emotional development of children in Barbados. A passion for trade unionism is one of her hallmarks in her service to the teachers of Barbados as an executive member of the Barbados Union of Teachers. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an illustrious group of persons. And to start the ball rolling, I'm going to invite Mr. Alwyn Adams to make his presentation, which will be for 10 minutes. Over to you, Mr. Adams. And your time starts now, Mr. Adams. You are free to go.
Visiting. I'm not.
We are hearing you, Mr. Adams.
What happened?
We are hearing you, Mr. Adams.
Oh, I thought you were going to have my PowerPoint up.
The PowerPoint is up. If you look at, you see that the PowerPoint is up.
I'm not getting it. Give me a few minutes. Sorry. I don't know what happened.
It is on the screen, Mr. Adams.
Oh, somebody else controlling it.
Somebody is controlling it.
No, it is on the screen right now, Mr. Adams. So you can just start, and the person will click when you are ready to change from slide to slide.
Right, no problem.
Oh.
So start from page 1, let's continue.
Yes. Well, I want to be provocative and say that Barbados, as the newest country as a republic, will not be able to achieve its social and economic aims until and unless the education system is reformed. I know that several people have been looking at the reform of education and indeed have not succeeded. But I believe that we in this organization is hoping to do the education reform, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. We had a situation where the chief persons in education in Barbados were all sent out from the United Kingdom. We're talking about the Bishop of Barbados, the Director of Education, the persons who were heads of the leading schools in Barbados. And they painstakingly set out to have our educational system functioning, not so much for Barbados, but for the preservation of British rule in the Caribbean. And so the model of the grammar school which was set up was similar to the British grammar school, and it was elitist and academic in orientation, etc. But it was so set up in such a manner that up to this day, it still counts as the important educational platform for this country. Next slide. Now, according to Val McCormick, the educational persons in Barbados were proud to have British education, in which the British controlled what counted as knowledge and who were allowed to have access. No one seemed to be aware that it was being used for preserving and perpetuating colonial rule, that it inculcated in students the psychology of dependency, promoted British values and culture while suppressing Barbadian identity, as well as the social and economic development of Barbados. The highest aim of ambitious Barbadian parents was to get a place in a grammar school for their children, but the grammar school was the preserve of the middle class. The grammar school, we must remember too, was also very small. Some numbers I have here, the Girls Foundation School had 75 girls, the boys 75, Corday School 44, Paris 30, Aline 30, Harrison College 264, and the total number overall was just about 1,500 children. But by 1950, thanks to the network of primary schools and the literacy rates that has skyrocketed in Barbados, the parents of students of the working class students began to call for places in the grammar school. The education authorities responded by what they would normally do, being English people. They looked to England for the answer, and they brought into Barbados the newer secondary school, which was introduced in Britain a decade before when faced with the same problem. The first of those schools was the St. Leonard's School at Richmond Gap. These schools were really a shadow of the grammar schools. They were for working class children. And so the separation between the working class and the middle classes remained, and the grammar schools remained the preserve of the middle school. A howl of protest came, and as a result, the authorities, rather than really building more grammar schools, they did again what the English did, and they set up the newer secondary schools, which was called by one of our leading educators, centers of institutional mediocrity. When it was seen that these schools were very unequal, then it was decided that this unequal situation would have to be addressed. And the way it was addressed was the introduction of the 11+ exam. This exam was touted as being very equal, to bring about equal education in Barbados. And a very powerful propaganda machinery went in place, along with a complicit press, to hoodwink, I would say, the Barbadian working class, that the 11+ would bring about equality of education in Barbados. The English lobby, the English grammar school lobby, really, the lobby in Barbados, they had won the day, and the 11+ and the allocation system became entrenched in the public psyche. They have, in fact, altogether become what we could call the sacred cows of Barbadian educational system. But as we shall see in a little while, there are really no sacred cows in education, no holy grails. For while the authorities in Barbados were busy hailing the 11+ as the holy grail of education, it was coming under bitter and relentless attack in the United Kingdom by reputable educators. I think it was Lord Reith who described it as a most efficient machine for the elimination of the unworthy. Even here in Barbados, Gladstone Holder proclaimed that giving a test at 11 was never educationally defensible. It was inflexibility and conformity over flexibility and common sense. I wonder now if you are aware of really the origin of the 11 plus. And indeed, many people think that it was a construct of the Barbadian genius. In fact, it was not. It was imported from the United Kingdom lock, stock, and barrel. And even more alarming, I don't believe that you may know that the papers, those original papers that were set for the 11 plus children in Barbados, were set by Murray House in Scotland by a person who knew nothing and cared less about Barbadian 11-year-olds in relation to cultural differences and so on. So it was also very embarrassing to hear something that will probably shock your sensibilities, that Cyril Burt, the man who had startled the world with proof that intelligence was more than 75% inherited and that it was fixed and that the child's educability and future potential could fairly be assessed by a test at 11, he was found out to be a fraud. But it was his research that the English educators went ahead and based the 11 plus on, and also the selected system for the grammar schools. And when it was found out that Burt had used bogus data and had used deception to shore up the hereditary theory on which he was the major advocate, it just threw everything in disarray. His work was used by
you have 2 more minutes, Mr. Adams, 2 more minutes.
Oh, there. Many enlightened educators in England no longer supported a system that continued to sort children into sheep and goats and to send them to schools that defenders of the status quo in ignorance, masquerading as wisdom, thought them best suited for. This view found great favor in the Plowden report published in 1967. That report tore holes into the 11 plus, and it's citing evidence. It said that the 11 plus was socially divisive, psychologically self-destructive, educationally explosive, that led to widespread streaming very early in the primary school and gambled with the life chances of children on the result of a one-off test. It was deemed grossly unfair, since up to 20% or approximately 50,000 children in the United Kingdom were misplaced every year. The grammar schools got the bright children and the neurosecondary school became dumping grounds for disadvantaged students. Plowden also pointed out to the fact of the damaging impact the 11 plus was having down in the curriculum of the primary school, which we all know about, of course. And it also called for the abolition of the 11 plus, along with the Robbins report, which came earlier, and decried the waste of talent and predicting that there was no lowering of standards as feared by the traditionalists if
30
the 11
seconds.
plus was moved.
30 seconds. You can make your final statement, Mr. Adams.
Well, I would probably say here that in Barbados as well, we found that Dr. Shorey and Dr. Obida and persons like Dr. Lane found similar research findings, and all condemned the 11 plus. Dr. Lane condemning it, saying that it was a relic of the colonial past, not fit for an independent nation. He accused it of undermining the struggle for equality in education while preserving aspects of the old colonial order. The colonial master has gone, he said, but the record shows that his educational structure has remained unchanged.
Excellent point on which to end, Mr. Adams. That is perfect. Excellent point.
Thank you.
And I am sure that we will have many persons with questions to ask when that time comes. At this time, so thank you for your presentation. At this time, I'm going to invite Dr. Hyacinth Harris to make her presentation. Dr. Harris. Thank you, Mr. Adams.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to Just trying to get my presentation sorted out. Yes,
It is on the screen as well already.
Dr. Harris, if you need my help, just let me know.
just a minute, just a minute. Imagine this.
It was showing before.
Can you see it?
I'm not seeing it yet.
Okay.
Asha can assist you because she also has it. So if you want her to, yeah, we're seeing it now.
It's there, but I wanted to.
Just
show
put it in
the different-
slideshow. Just put it in
That's what-
slideshow from beginning and it should go there.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Asha, can you assist her in this?
If she presses
Oh,
the button at the bottom, right,
Oh,
that,
she has it. She has it. Yeah.
good.
Okay, you're good to go. So your 10 minutes starts now, Dr. Harris.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall, and good evening to President Rudy Lovell, other members of the committee, and all those persons who are on this platform. As you heard before, my topic is the transition to secondary level education, possible alternatives. First of all, I want to have a look at the conceptual framework. Then I'm going to look at what we already know. I'm also going to have a look at the alternatives that we can propose and some needs. So the transition from primary to secondary school is a reality in the education system that we all must face. Parents, students, teachers, and in fact, most education sorry, I'm trying to start my video. Right, parents, students, teachers, and in fact, most education stakeholders, if not all, anticipate this period. The research suggests, however, that transition as it is experienced by children combines both a sense of optimism and anticipation with anxiety or fear. In particular, Topping 2011 notes that while teachers are principally concerned with attainment, students are more concerned with the socio-emotional issues such as peer relations and bullying, self-esteem, and external support networks. The transition period is said to be a period of challenge and/or stress. Students are expected to cope with unfamiliar organizational and social structures. They worry about the school environment, for example, the size of the school, getting lost, traveling to and from school, being separated from their current friends, the magnitude of homework, higher academic expectations, and the older pupils in the schools. But as students make the transition, they need to experience a sense of belonging. Sense of belonging is associated with relationships with teachers and their classmates. And according to existing research, students with a high sense of belonging and those who are functioning well in the socio-emotional sphere tend to be highly motivated and receive better grades, while those with a low sense of belonging tend to be alienated at school and achieve poorly, and some may eventually drop out of school. Let's look quickly at what currently obtains. Here in Barbados, we're aware that there's a common entrance exam. Mr. Adams spoke about that already. With regard to assessing students in the primary level for the transition to secondary school, we know that this exam is used every year, and students who will be 11 years old by the 31st of August in the same year of the exam are expected to write it. Students are examined in mathematics and language arts, inclusive of an essay component. But parental choice also plays a role in the transition. Parents are provided with a form, a choice of school form, and a booklet from which they may make their 9 choices. Parents are given the option to choose 2 secondary schools outside their zone. And these 2 schools must be their first and second choices All of the schools must be selected from the zone where the child's address is recorded. Academic performance also plays a role in transitioning, and traditionally secondary schools have been ranked academically, and as a result, students are allocated to those schools based on their overall score in the exam and the choices of their parents. The range of scores for allocation tends to fluctuate from year to year based on the national performance of students and the number of places available at the schools. In the Caribbean, in the Eastern Caribbean, specifically, we have the CPEA, the Caribbean Primary Exit Assessment, and territories such as St. Vincent, Grenada, and St. Lucia use this assessment to move students from primary to secondary schools. It was introduced by Caribbean Examination Council in 2012, and according to the CXC, this assessment is concerned with ascertaining the key literacy possessed by all pupils exiting the primary school system. These include mathematical, language, civic, and scientific literacies. But here in Barbados, we have a proposal before us for the reform of the education system. We do not really know formally what it entails, but we have heard what everyone else in the public heard. We have heard that there will be the abolition of the common entrance and that there will be the establishment of middle schools. The key issue, however, is this question: will the proposal that the government advanced address the issues emerging from the current system? We have issues that are related to the physical plants. We have issues related to the curriculum and the execution of it. We have issues related to principals, teachers, parents, and students' involvement in the decision-making processes and those matters that affect them. So we are recommending that from primary to what we call the tier 1 secondary, students in the age range of 10 and 13 would be in this tier 1 secondary. But before the students move on to secondary school, they should be engaged in what we call formative assessment, in which they engage in tasks that allow both the students and the teachers to see exactly where they are performing educationally and to put measures in place to help them to improve, measures that will help to further guide the instruction. Thompson et al. 2018 recognized that formative assessment is a critical component in teaching, and therefore they're suggesting that for formative assessment, teachers can use items like portfolios, performance-based tasks, and so on to assess the students. And assessment should primarily be in mathematics and language arts, which will account for 40% of the final mark. Students will also be expected to engage in what we call the general paper, social studies and science, and this will account for 100%. The summative assessment will also be done in mathematics and language arts, but this will account for 60%. Now, the general paper is extremely important because if the content is well taught, it can aid in emphasizing citizenship skills and personal life skills. We are also saying that students be allowed to remain at their primary school to write the examination and be supervised by external teachers. This can mitigate against the unnecessary anxiety that students currently experience when required to write the common entrance at secondary school. We are also proposing that teachers—
Dr. Harris, you have 2 more minutes. Two more
Okay.
minutes, Dr. Harris, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Primary school teachers may operate in secondary schools for approximately 3 years. These teachers can roll over, but this will also help in the transition period and make it less traumatic for the students. In the tier 1 secondary school, secondary level, we're saying that the same teachers should be teaching the core subjects. So teachers must be able to teach 4 subjects rather than 1 subject. and they must be able to use a variety of instructional strategies as well as a differentiated curriculum. Now at tier 2 secondary, which I believe we'll hear about later, the age range would be 14 and older, and here more emphasis would be placed on knowledge and skill sets, and students would be involved in written assessments, teacher-made assessment, portfolios, performance-based tasks, etc. But this would be 100% and will aid them as they prepare for the CXC examinations. So what do we need here and now? First of all, we are proposing that you abolish the National Criterion Reference Test. This is an important test, but it is not executed well in its
30 seconds.
format. It is played with issues and has lots of inaccuracies. We are proposing that there be an assessment bank so that it is much easier for those who are preparing papers to find items. Rubrics should be used for assessing students. There must be the security of assessments, and at the tier 1 secondary, interdisciplinary teams to help. Principals should consider flexible schedules, have common planning time, and the school sizes need to be reduced. The 3 core areas that should be given emphasis are the curriculum, instruction, and leadership.
You can make your final submission at this time, Dr. Harris. Final point at this time.
Okay, it means then this will have implications for retraining and capacity building. We're saying that in terms of leadership, that leaders should be in touch with reality, recognize weaknesses, and put measures in place to address those weaknesses. And they should be able to organize the school to achieve the established goals. And they should be able to utilize skilled staff members of the school and community resources to meet the needs of the school.
A nice ending point, Dr. Harris. So thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall.
And we're at the point now where it is your turn, members of the audience. And I invite you to use the traditional method. You raise your hand, and Asha will assist me in terms of those hands that I do not see. So as you raise your hand, I will recognize you and you'll be allowed to ask your question. Please direct your question to either Dr. Harris or Mr. Adams for a response. Who? I don't see any hands as yet. Yes, I see Mr. Goddard. Mr. Goddard, you can go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I want to make a comment on Mr. Adams's presentation. And I want to start by saying that I support what he had to say about the common entrance examination. What I think we need to do is to look at an alternative for the exam. How do we transition students from primary to secondary school? Now, because the present structure of the secondary school system is so entrenched in the psyche of Barbadians, we are always going to have pushback because people will still see that there is a problem for children to determine how children will get into Harrison College and Queen's College and even St. Michael. That is a major concern people have. I believe if those schools were not in the mix, a lot of the arguments and the quarrels that we have over people, the abolition of the 11+ will not arise. But I have a proposal, but I'm not going to have the time to present it. But what I want to say about Dr. Harris's presentation, she raised the issues, some of the issues that we have in the primary system and some of the changes that we should make. But I didn't get from her how we are going to deal with getting the students into the secondary school and how you're going to determine which secondary schools the students are going to go to.
All right, but Mr.
Because
Goddard,
if
Mr. Goddard, before you proceed, let me invite Dr. Harris to respond to that before you proceed. Dr. Harris, you want to respond to that query or that comment by Mr. Goddard?
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. Now, in the presentation, I said that the examination that we move from the current format for the examination, which is primarily a placement exam, and we consider the child more importantly in this process. And so at the primary school level, we engage in formative assessments, and these will occur at classes 3 and 4. Students will then be examined in a one-shot exam similar to what the common entrance is now. But instead of being allocated 100% of the marks, this exam will only require 60% because the children would already have achieved up to 40% during the formative assessments. Formative assessments are considered to be extremely important in helping students to achieve better in education. When students are engaged at school and teachers test them there, they're able to then return to what they have done. Teachers are able to use the results from those assessments to determine how they will teach these students further on so that they can achieve success, because the aim really is to help the students to succeed. And so if students engage in formative assessments very early on, by the time they're ready to do that summative assessment, which would be worth 60%, they will already have acquired much of the content and therefore be better able to achieve almost 60%, if not 60%, in that summative assessment. So that's one thing. Now, the allocation to the various schools will be quite different because we have to look at the secondary schools and we have to determine, there has been the talk about schools of excellence and so on. You're going to hear a bit more about that in the other presentation, so I will not even go there. But I'm saying in terms of allocating students to the secondary schools, I believe that students should be allocated to schools that are close to their homes, but there should always be these other schools, what we may term schools of excellence, that students can make their choices from. And I don't think it should, the assessments that students do at primary school level should be only for placement. They should be there to rectify any deficiencies when students reach tier 1 of secondary school.
All right, thank you, Dr. Harris. Mr. Goddard, you want to rebut that? Not rebut, you want to respond, sorry, to that? Quickly, you have 30 seconds.
I understand. Yeah, I understand all about the formative assessment and all that and the importance of that, but it still does not answer the question about how we are going to allocate the students in schools, given the fact that I said this elitist structure of.
So what is your suggestion, Mr. Goddard? What are you putting on the table? What is your suggestion? You are discounting or rejecting the what we have now. What are you suggesting that we should do? Let me hear you.
I am suggesting that we start by identifying a few of the schools as sixth form colleges, take them out the mix, and then for all the other children, all the other schools, they will take students from within their catchment area.
I want to stop you there, Mr. Goddard. So when you take all the students, on what basis are you going to be determining which schools will be sixth form colleges? What criteria will you be using for that?
Well, you can use one criterion could be the fact that certain schools are already doing sixth form education.
But Mr. Goddard, if you use that criteria, that criterion that you have suggested, you are still feeding back into the same elitist paradigm because let me just finish the point first, and I'll get you come in. The point you are making is that you will use these sixth form schools that are already defined that are already doing sixth form. So all I'm saying is that if you use that methodology, what you are doing is that you are still taking some of the old ideas and bringing it into the new. So you can respond now.
No. You see, because the sixth form colleges will just be that sixth form, they're not going to take students at all at age 11. They wouldn't take any students at age 11. The other schools are going to take children at age 11. All children will receive a solid secondary education up to Form 3. At Form 3, then students could go on to pursue the academic education if that's what they want. But you should also have some institutions that will take students to do technical vocational studies. So at the third form level, when students would normally go into fourth form, that is what would happen. So you're going to have some students moving towards the academic stream, some students moving to technical vocational.
Okay, thank you. Let me just get another comment here. Mr. Rodney wants to come in. You can come in, Rodney. Thank you, Mr. Goddard.
Yeah.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you quite well.
Awesome. Now, for the whole thing about common entrance and the transference of from the primary to the secondary, my solution, or at least my input in that area, is the system that we currently have, we can improve upon. We don't need to make any drastic changes. My solution is within the primary school level, we can have teachers from the junior level, from class 1 to class 4, teachers who specialize in our core subjects, which would be mathematics, language arts, physical education, science, and art. Don't care where we go in this world, you have to do an assessment test. I don't think we have enough resources in place to put the programs in that we're talking about. We have teachers that need to be specialized. One of the other things that I believe that should be done is we have teachers for remedial education. We do assessments. We have assessments throughout each year. In the primary school system in Barbados, it is easy to identify. You know, the children having problems with mathematics, and
we lost you, Rodney. We lost you for a moment. You're still there, Rodney? All right, we seem to have lost Rodney. You can come back in later. I'll go now to Deborah Lovell. Please share your question or comment, Deborah.
Okay, good afternoon. Unfortunately, I was trying to get on all the time and I couldn't.
Okay.
So I'm at a loss. But I listened to what John said about leaving out these schools as a sixth form school, and then you assign the children to the other schools. When you assign these children, is that going to be a mixed ability approach? Because if you're assigning me to the school nearest to me, whether I am, let's say, average, below average, or whatever, are all of us going to be together in the same school?
All right, go on.
You want me to answer that?
Yes, Mr. Love, you can respond.
You want me to answer that? Of course.
No.
Of course. Of course.
Of course. Therefore,
yeah, well,
you're going to need.
I give her a chance, Mr. Goddard. You said of course, and she's now responding to you. Yes, Deborah, go on.
Because when you mix all these children together, you're going to have specialists for the different areas or children with certain problems placed in each school, which in my opinion, if you stream me and you put all like me together, you can use the resources that you have better. You wouldn't have to be looking for like 12 or let's say I had to look at 14 specialist teachers in science or not mathematics, remedial teachers, that's what I mean. You wouldn't have to do that when all of us are separated or grouped. But the problem, we can talk about economics, they don't have any money, and all they can see is going to be a bundle of confusion when you do that, right?
All right, thank you, Deborah. You have 30 seconds, 30 seconds.
All right, you go ahead. I'll come again.
Yes, come again. Oh, you're welcome. Ian, I see your hand is raised as well. Yes, Mr. Goddard, 30 seconds to respond, then I'm going to another person.
Yeah,
30 seconds.
I don't know. When you put, to put what she's saying, all these children who have problems in the same school will amount to the same problem we have now. Where you
Okay.
take the children that are supposed to be scoring less than 20 and 30% in some schools and claiming that you're going to do remedial work with them, all that. Doesn't happen.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. Goddard. All right, Ian Marshall, you can go now. I recognize you can go. Make your comment.
Yes, I want to acknowledge Mr. Adams. Mr. Adams has a propensity for conflict, and I welcome that. So I have the same dialectical approach when it comes to the common entrance exam. I've corrected common entrance exam for close to 10 years, and I've seen the mistakes that the children make. I'm also an educator at the primary level. So from nursery to class 4, we focus on the subjects which the children will be able to do coming on to common entrance level. Now, when the children get to class 1, they're galloping very quickly towards the common entrance exam. A lot of the things that we are supposed to be doing to prepare that child for the secondary school, they are left out. Okay, a lot of the environmental work, the groundwork, the social studies, the health and family life, and those kind of things, to a large extent, are left out across the system. All right. I heard the college just now was saying that there needs not to be a change. I disagree, because when we give a child 8 subjects at the primary level, and then when we come to class 4, 11 years, and we only assess the child in 2, moving from one area to a next, one transitioning from primary to secondary. I think that is an injustice.
Okay, very well. You have 30 seconds. Make your final comment. 30 seconds.
Right. It also shows that there needs to be a broadening, ideologically grounding in what we consider to be educational parts in Barbados. Right.
Okay. Certainly. Thank you, Ian. One more question. We have 1 minute left in this segment. One more person that has a burning issue. I see Dr. Harris's hand is up again. So I'll give the final minute to you, Dr. Harris.
Yes, Dr. Marshall. I sat here and I listened to all that was said, and I believe that fundamentally we have to look at the child. We have to recognize that students in primary school need to have all the foundational concepts, or as many as possible, before they enter into secondary school. And this whole idea of which schools should be the top schools, or the schools where the gifted students go, and so on. I think that we have to recognize that currently our schools are not equipped to deal with the transition as we would want it to happen. It's not going to be perfect. We have to look at school buildings and so on. How can they accommodate these students? We have to look at teaching staff, principals. It is a full gamut that we have to engage in before we even look at this whole reform process. So as I said, at the end, it's curriculum, instruction, and it is leadership. Everything is included.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Harris. And on that note, we are going to invite Yvette Simmons-Gemmitt to come in and do her presentation on the heels of some heated debate. Mrs. Yvette Simmons-Gemmitt, over to you. Thank you for all your contributions thus far. Simmons-Gemmitt?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
You are welcome, ma'am.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. From the outset, let me apologize for not using the camera. Doing major dental work, which precludes, in my opinion, the use of the camera. Believe me, this is as much for your protection as it is for mine.
Thank you so much, Gemma.
My presentation is about middle schools, or in our jurisdiction, junior academies. In this very short presentation, I'll be looking at how middle schools were conceptualized in other territories, the challenges that were faced in so doing, and if that information presents us with any solutions as to how we should proceed, or even if we should proceed. What's in a name? Middle school generally refers to the junior school, which in the Barbadian context is first to third form, 11 to 14 years. We have chosen the term junior academy. We've heard nothing from the Director of Reform to suggest that the name refers to anything else but the junior school. So we're going to assume that it's the concept of the middle school, or as some other territories call it, the junior set. What's in a name indeed. The middle school concept was first mooted by William Alexander at a conference at Cornell University in 1963. He'd been assigned the keynote speech and struggled to find, as he put it, dynamism. Thanks to a delayed flight on his way to Cornell, he had the time to outline a new focus for the school between elementary and high school. Thus, the middle school concept was started. He thought that schools had lost touch with the developmental needs of the pre-adolescent student. He thought they had their own needs, which were not being met, and he advocated that they should be allowed more freedom, more opportunities to explore new interests, and he said that they needed more exploratory experiences than the greater emphasis on academic subjects. So when the notion was started, the whole idea of constructivist learning, therefore, was mooted. And the idea that academic achievement should take a back seat was advanced. Another area was guidance programs. More emphasis was placed then on student support services, such as psychologists, guidance counselors, etc. Now let's look at the Bermudian experience. Like Barbados, Bermuda's method of allocating students from primary to secondary was based on marks received in an exam, which they called the secondary selection examination. And like Barbados, this allocation system was seen as elitist and in some ways discriminatory. Students were assigned to one of the 2 academic schools or one of the 5 non-academic ones. Thus, in 1981, a decision was taken to abolish this. In 1995, the recommendation, therefore, to discontinue the secondary solution exam and introduce middle schools was accepted. And they did this using a 4-tier system from primary to middle school and the senior level. And at that senior level, you had another tier, which included a possible extra year. This was enacted in the 1996 Education Act. In a 1995 study, it was found that mathematics students, going ahead of myself. The Trinidadian concept. Students in Trinidad and Tobago sat an entrance examination like those in Bermuda and Barbados. And prior to 1972, there were not enough places in secondary schools for every student. The junior secondary school, therefore, was established to make sure that in 5 years, at least 77% of the population could be allocated to a secondary school. It must be noted that the students who were in the lower percentile of the entrance exam were placed in the junior secondary school. So this was called the junior secondary and not middle, but it's the same concept. As would be expected, those students who had been given the opportunity of secondary school were generally to be found in the working class. So the creation of the junior sec, as it is commonly called, was the government's way to allow for the working class to access secondary education. What are the drawbacks to middle school? Academic achievement. Given the fact that academic achievement had been de-emphasized in middle schools when they started in the US, It should not be a surprise that a statement like the one being shared could have been made. Research done in school districts in New York concluded that middle schools are not the best way to educate students, and that students who enter public middle schools in New York City fell behind their peers in normal schools. They also found that students with lower initial levels of academic achievement, that is, students who were not doing well academically, fared especially poorly in middle school. In a 1995 study cited in Education Next, it was found that mathematics students who had yet to enter middle school fared better than those who had nearly completed middle school. In 2007, there was a comprehensive review of public education in Bermuda. This was conducted by a team of 6 evaluators, 4 from the UK and 2 from Bermuda. This group visited all the public primary, middle, secondary, and special schools in Bermuda and found that as a group, the middle schools were the least effective. They opined that students made a slow start and insufficient progress in middle schools and generally achieved standards that were too low by the end of this phase. They thought that middle schools compared unfavorably to private schools in Bermuda and public education in the UK and the US. They used the Terra Nova assessment that purports to measure critical thinking and problem-solving skills. This data showed that the average reading standard of Bermuda students after 1 year in the middle school was lower than the end of primary school. The group concluded that there's a serious and general loss of momentum on transfer to middle schools. Antisocial behavior was one of these things that many people looked at. Commentators in the US have described middle schools or middle schoolers variously as hormones flying all over the place, the toughest to teach, or where both behavior and learning suffer. In all 3 territories examined, antisocial behavior was considered one of the main challenges encountered. Transitioning was dealt with by Dr. Harris very well, and we recognize that any transitioning carries with it feelings of anxiety, the stress of fitting in, etc. But in our local example, we recognize that it is at the 4th year that schools allow students to register for CSEC Math and English. And it is that year that students will be transitioning to whatever school they're going to. The problem is that the students will not know the teachers, and conversely, the teachers will not know the students, who they will only in a short matter of weeks have to recommend to sit an exam. There's also the problem of culture and mores. The difference in culture, the difference in mores will have students very, very confused. We recognize the policy of trauma among students who are leaving primary to enter secondary. And we have lots of programs to deal with this trauma. We therefore have to recognize that the same, if not greater trauma, will occur with the transitioning from middle school or junior academies to senior school. And in this instance, the students will be now dealing with 2 transitions rather than 1. So they're dealing with the transition from primary to middle, and then they have to transition from middle to senior.
2 more minutes.
In the Barbadian framework, this is as much as we have really not been told that much from Dr. Denny, the director of reform. so we can look at the concerns. And we just dealt with transitioning, lack of consultation. This is a huge but ongoing concern. The refusal to meet with teachers or to consult teachers to solicit their views or their misgivings. And we've had a history of such lack of consultation with the resultant effect of failure of that we have wanted to have. Teacher dissatisfaction is also one, especially with the concept of middle schools. I'm yet to find a teacher who loves teaching only the junior school. I've never heard of in any school where teachers have complained that they have to teach the senior school. As a matter of fact, what generally occurs is that teachers complain that for some reason they are being left out of the senior school.
30 seconds.
The reason for this might be what we discussed earlier, the whole problem of the hormones flying all over the place, and the fact that the school will have only 11 to 13-year-olds. Human resources, more staff. I think Dr. Hyacinth spoke about that as well. So I have attempted to share with you examples of middle schooling in countries. I think the example which should capture or demand our attention is the Bermudian one because of the many parallels it shares with Barbados. Thank you.
Excellent point on which to end. Thank you, Simmons German. And we will move smoothly on now to the presentation by my namesake, Ian Marshall. You are up next. It's your time to shine.
Yes. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I think that largely what we are engaging in here is nothing new, and I think it is largely as a result of the failures in education. And I was reading an article recently by Ralph Jamat, and he had commented on the ifs, the buts, and maybes of education. And one of the things that he pointed out was that, this issue is not the Nelson issue. That is a moot point. But I find that our policies that we have placed, they run very closely to what we have seen recently in terms of the Republic issue and in terms of what the Nelson issue. That's my personal position. What I'm going to do today, I'm just going to do a broad sketch of what a school of excellence is, because they're varying models. And we do not know what has been mooted. We don't know what particular model our educational officials are looking at. All right, so schools of excellence, basically, they are broadly defined and they can vary from region to region. They're based on elements that are judged to make them successful and excellent. So, for instance, having a vision that ensures every student is successful. Most of these schools that you will see touting the school of excellence policy or position, they are normally involved in that. So what are the characteristics of an excellent school? A clear and shared focus, high standards and expectations for students, effective school leadership, high levels of collaboration and communication between parents, communities. There's a crystallization of the curriculum content. So when we're moving from primary or elementary school into the middle school and then into the school, what is considered the school of excellence in some cases, you're looking at a prioritization of the academic subjects which those children are going to specialize in, if we use that term. So at that level, then we are moving away from the more broad-based type of education into a more focused or pyramid-shaped educational structure. So we have things like frequent monitoring of learning and teaching, focused professional development, between in the particular schools of concern. Ensuring and prioritizing that students and parents, that parents and community are a priority. So in schools of excellence, as I said, there's that collaboration, that prioritizing between the community and the parents. This is an ideal situation which we're like here in our communities in Barbados. It works to some extent, but we do not have that across the board. So if that is the direction that we're looking at, then we have to put more focus on looking at things of that nature. All right, implementing varied academic and innovative non-academic curriculums that improve student learning. So not only in some cases you might have academic subjects, in some cases there may be non-academic subjects, but in terms of looking at things like disabilities, what are the systems that will be put in place to accommodate students with those types of abilities? And those abilities, when we talk about disabilities, you know, they can be varied and many. Creating a learning environment, welcoming the students of different backgrounds, and sharing leadership responsibilities to involve various stakeholders. Now, often here we talk about stakeholders in education, but in schools of excellence, where persons are expecting these types of schools to deliver, then we really have to be on the ball when it comes to school of excellence and the delivery of education involving stakeholders at various levels. Schools of excellence also obtain accreditation and recognition in different ways. So for example, awards, for instance, in the US, there's the Blue Ribbon Schools program that recognizes public and private elementary, middle, and high schools for overall students' performance and academic excellence nationally. There's an accrediting commission of career schools and colleges in the United States of America. It's called the ACCSC, and this accredits institutions for the efforts in demonstrating a high level of achievement among their students and a commitment to the accreditation process. So ACCSC asserts that, you know, innovative and exciting projects are happening every day at schools. And this is a platform that they use to provide an opportunity for schools to share their best practices with each other as a means to support student success in the workforce. So this accreditation outlines, it has expectations such as, well, expectations for members is a broad membership body, and they have management of administrative operations, they have program requirements, educational administration, and faculty qualifications, student recruiting, advertising, admissions policy and practices, student services, student achievement, and distance education. Now you can see that this is a broad conceptual framework, and it will take a great deal of planning and obviously finance to be able to be executed. There's also a National Council for Excellence Awards. It recognizes excellence through consistent leadership qualities and service to schools. So there's a national PTA School of Excellence in those jurisdictions which have schools of excellence. Most schools given this award are schools that are recognized for efforts on how schools and families work together, very important. They make student achievements increase and improve the school and strengthen the community. It's an award to strengthen family-school relationships. I want to look quickly at the pros and cons of such a venture and the implications. Well, I think another presenter will look at the implications, but it has serious implications for us down here in terms of resources, a deployment of resources which will have to be handled on a much bigger scale. We can also look at things, changing learning formats. Now, too often we tend to take on things that come from outside of our region. Without
Ian, can you change your slide so we can see what you're speaking to? You have your slides. Oh, sorry. Okay, go on. My apologies. Go on.
Just fleshing out the points that I have here.
Okay, go on.
What we too often we tend to look at the models that come from outside. Now, when I was at Earlston, we were shown classrooms that were very broad with all the resources, and many of those things, you know, were out of the reach of the average teacher here in this country. And I'm not sure that when we take on when we accept the schools of excellence portrayal or portrait that we are hearing about, that we are equipped with the resources as challenged as we are right now within the normal school system. I'm not sure if that is the way that we can go. And I'm not sure what type of resources that we have that can deal with those types of setups. All right, so in terms of resource availability, accommodation of additional schools, I think that was mentioned already. We have to look at additional staffing, ancillary workers, special needs teachers, all those kind of things, counselors, because it is a networking of school, community, parents, teachers, and so on. And these things need to be taken into consideration. We also have to look at regrade teachers based on experience and qualifications. We have to look
2 minutes, 2 minutes left, 2 minutes.
Impact on pensions and gratuity and so on, right? And of course, increased wages and salaries. All right, so that's my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Ian. And we have come to that special segment where you the audience, know you get your chance to have your say. And we'll do as we did before. I'll set my timer first for this 15-minute segment. Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Ms. Gemma. So this is our question and answer segment. So you can raise your hand, I will recognize you, and we will start the ball rolling again. Okay, I don't see, I see Desiree. Please go ahead with your question or comment, Desiree. You can go ahead, Desiree.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you quite clearly.
Just checking. I just wanted to speak to transitioning because I've been hearing it mentioned a couple times in terms of transitioning to middle school, transitioning to secondary school. And I don't even know why it is an issue because transition is a normal process in human life. We cannot avoid transitioning. And it sounds like we are trying to like sugarcoat life for these students. It's gonna happen. We can't avoid it. And this is my next point, even as it relates to transitioning. If you're saying this is so much trauma, why haven't I heard about dealing with the emotional issues and personal issues of these children? Where is the provision for personal development in order to develop character, purpose, motivation? I have noticed that that has been lacking because I think that is an issue that happens in schools who have children with lower academic achievement. They have no purpose to learn. So why would I try to learn? We need to help develop the person first before we focus on their academics. So I just want to know, where is that provision?
Okay, thank you, Desiree, for that question. Who wants to take that on the panel? But I just, in all fairness, I think the panelists did allude and actually spoke to the whole notion of emotional intelligence, maybe not in those terms, but they did speak to that. So who on the panel wants to take that question or that comment, want to respond? All right, see Dr. Harris, her hand is up. Go ahead, Dr. Harris.
Yes, I'm going to take it because mention was made of the fact that all individuals go through transitioning in life. But remember that we are at different stages of life when we transition. Everybody, I believe, experience some level of trauma when they are expected to write examinations. Children within the school setting experience anxiety. Adults at university experience anxiety. All of us do. But what we are looking at is reducing the anxiety that students who are at that concrete operational stage, that stage where their hormones are now beginning to go amok. We are looking at reducing the anxiety that those students experience. And therefore, to have a one-off exam like the common entrance exam, that is not the ideal situation to put those students in. With regard to developing their personality traits, and this was a mention, but citizenship, education, and etc. I did say in my presentation that when we engage students in formative assessments. The instructional period is geared to help them develop personality skills, citizenship skills, etc. Because as the teacher provides the instruction, the teacher assesses, looks at how the student is thinking, and then both student and teacher can again can address the issues that may occur or that may appear when the assessment is done. It is extremely important that we cater to the needs of the children. We look at these children, they are not adults. There are young children in primary school, and they may behave sometimes as if they are adults, but they are not. And we need to reduce the stress that they experience at this level.
Thank you for that response. And I want to call on Simmons Gemma, the next panelist, to give her response. Simmons Gemma, the floor is yours.
There have been many studies on the whole notion of transitioning, whether it is from middle school to the senior school, whether it's from primary to secondary. And those studies have shown that students have had lots of problems with the transitioning. I didn't mention them because I only had 10 minutes, but there's a study in the States by a man called Fregoso in 2015. He suggested that transition from middle to high school is a challenging time for student disconnection, which can ultimately impact academic performance at high school. A man called Antoine Ali in Trinidad and Tobago in 2016 researched the transition from junior sec to senior sec. And he found a whole range of problems, not just anxiety, but there were antisocial problems as well because of the anxiety that students had from transitioning. And in Barbados, as I said before, we have seen it. Every vacation, we have camps with, and I don't know that this is simply holding hands. I think it is a problem that we have noticed. And the problem is, or the point is, if you've noticed that, and I called it trauma, and I don't apologize for that. If you've noticed that trauma from primary to secondary, and you deal with it, why would you increase the trauma again to do it again from third to fourth? It's just a question.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Gemma. I'm going to call on Mr. Adams to come back in now, and then I'm going to go to John, Goddard, and Desiree. So Mr. Adams first, and then Goddard and Desiree. Mr. Adams, the floor is yours. Mr. Adams, are you hearing me?
Hello, you can hear me?
Yes,
now?
we're hearing you quite clearly, Mr. Adams. You can go ahead.
Okay. Yes, I just wanted to make the point that I believe that we may be overlooking the extremely serious problems that we have been having in our primary schools, particularly since the onset of the 11 plus. Now, before the 11 plus, I don't want to dwell in history though. Before the 11 plus, this country was known to have a very high literacy rate. If you were to look at the statistics about children coming out of our primary schools now, and not only now, the Cyril report, not too long after the 11 plus came in and so on. And what it is showing is that we need to have another look at our primary schools. And essentially, rather than speaking about schools of excellence, which is a good idea, I suppose, we need to have good primary schools all over this island. And the notion, for example, that you would have a primary school that is close to me, and the secondary school, Queen's College, if I may call it, is close to me. And there's a section of the population surrounding Queen's College that goes to the primary school and doesn't send any students to King's College in the area where the students live. Now that is a recipe for social disaster. And I think that we ought to be looking to see how to staff primary schools, have strong leadership in primary schools, evaluation of primary schools, so that across this island, I've heard a chief education officer saying how glad she was to see some children in the country schools going into Harrison College or Queen's College. But St. Clement's and St. Albans and All Saints and all those far-flung places, this island, all over this island, was renowned for outstanding primary schools. And they didn't have, at the time, they didn't have a lot of resources, and their outlook was kind of limited. But they did relatively well what they had to do. I am of the opinion that the primary school is losing its way.
Okay, thank you for that point, Mr. Adams. And we go now to Mr. Goddard. Yes, Mr. Goddard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I am going to ask your permission to leave. So let me make this last. I have another engagement. Look, we can dance around this issue as much as we like. But I don't know. Elephant in the room. We cannot. The abolition of the common entrance exam is not the only element in education reform. We cannot have education reform. And I want to start this. We cannot have education reform without dealing with the common entrance exam, which I consider to be the elephant in the room.
All right.
And I understand Mr. Adams spoke about the primary school thing. The problem is, Mr. Chairman, not teaching resources and all that in primary school, you know. It is that the primary school curriculum is influenced by the need to get students to pass the common entrance exam, common entrance exam. So the school is organized in such a way. A lot of our principals organize their schools in such a way to make sure that the ones who look as though they're going to bring fame to the school by going into AC and QC and so on, they are given special attention. I don't know that only because of what teachers say. I taught children at Harrison College who told me that how they were treated as opposed to how other children in school are treated. Until we organize our school system, as Hyacinth said earlier, to teach children rather than to teach for an examination. That's what we do, you know. We teach for an examination. And the question I want to leave you all is this. What purpose does it serve? We have
you broke up for a minute there, Mr. Goddard. Just say that, make your final statement again.
What purpose does the common entrance exam serve? We now have a school system in which all of the schools are equipped with qualified teachers. Why then, at age 11, we want to take the people's children and allocate them to certain school based on what? The marks that they got? I think you would have better students, some of the ones that Mr. Adams was talking about, community primary schools, if we were concerned with teaching all of the children and working with the children where they are and preparing them for transfer to secondary school, not allocation to particular schools. Get them ready, literate and numerate enough to be able to benefit from secondary school. And
thank you. On that point, Mr. Goddard, we thank you for that very valid point. I'm going to go to Desiree because we just have about 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Thank you. Desiree, you can have your retort. Thank you, Mr. Goddard.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Harris spoke about the transitioning and, you know, it being trauma, and which I understand. But this is my thing. It is a trauma. I think babies go through trauma from crawling to learn to walk. That's a new thing. They experience that transition. And I guess it's a trauma, anxiety, fine, normal. But then if you're doing this for common interest, are we going to stop all exams from within the school system then? Because children that experience trauma every year at the end of the year exam. So it means then that we must stop this trauma in terms of the transitioning of going through the anxiety from going into an exam every end of year to move into a next class. I think it must stop then. If we're doing it for common interest, do it right across the board. Stop it in primary school altogether.
Okay,
Just
thank
stop
you.
it and let it go to primary
Thank you for
school.
that point. Let me hear the response from the panel. Thank you for that point, Desiree. Response from the panel. Who wants to take this? I see Ian. Go, Ian.
Okay. Now it is traumatic to me to know that children as young as 11 years old are going through a period of unfairness, as I call it, because transitioning from one period to the next is very narrow in scope. And when we look at the history of the development of these children, a lot of them are left on their own to paddle their own canoes. So that in itself is traumatic. As I said, I've corrected papers and I've seen children who cannot even write their names. They can't, all they can do is rewrite the questions. Children who have dyslexia and all different kinds of learning disabilities are thrown into that water at the common interest level. I want to make a step back further and look at the criterion reference test, because for me, the criterion reference test is a particular bugbear. The criterion reference test is similar to the common interest exam, where you take a child that is underperforming, a child, for instance, that is infants A, supposed to be working at infants B level, and you all of a sudden when the child gets in infants B, you bring that child from infants A and put it through criterion reference test. And then you tell us that every child matters. That is unfairness. So therefore, at the common interest exam, I see the same thing happening, right? Where you are moving children from one level because they're developmentally, they're not working at the level at where they're supposed to be. They're challenged developmentally. And when all of a sudden, when it comes to a test that the ministry wants implemented in terms of whatever policies they have to live up to, then you bring that child and you put it to do, that is totally unfair, right? And it goes against the rights of a child and everything that we know that is historically and educationally sound. Right?
Thank you, Ian. And on that note, Ian, we're going to go to our last segment, which is implications. So that will dovetail nicely to what we're going to next. And I invite Tara Durant to do her presentation. Tara, the floor is yours. Thank you, Ian.
Good night, everyone. Well, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So good night, good evening. I'm doing that a lot. It's dark out here. My task is simple, to look at education reform and the educator. A lot of my points have been raised earlier, so we're just going to go through my very brief presentation. So since teachers are the key ingredients in children's learning, it is important that they are engaged in the change process and also attention is paid to their capacity building. This was taken from a study done in 2017 in Fiji when they were looking at their education reform. So we know that teachers are the key, we can say, a very major stakeholder in education reform. So what does that mean for educators? What does this change mean for us? We've heard a lot about students, but what does it mean for us? So implications for educators. So we're going to go through a summary of the implications in this process for us. This would have come from a sample of our membership here in the Barbados Union of Teachers. So we'll talk about the physical impact. So first of all, there is obviously the disruption and relocation of teachers. If we're talking about going to junior academies and academies of excellence, which are going to focus on certain subject areas, that means you need specialist teachers. Where are you getting the specialist teachers from? Are you going to go around the island and look at the qualifications of teachers and pull them into specialist schools, which means they'll be relocated from all over the island? And will these teachers be given the freedom to choose what school they want to work in, or will they just be picked by the higher level management? That is a concern that members have. There's also school allocation. We currently have secondary schools that take the students from primary school, that takes the students from primary to secondary. How many of those current secondary schools will become junior academies? And how many will be academies of excellence? Or will the schools be split in two, where there are junior academies and academies of excellence? If that's not the case, will new schools be built? So all of that is a time consuming process. And again, teachers have questions. there's also the question of school names. To take away stigma, teachers want to know, will schools be renamed to take away that stigma of a high school, a low school? You would see here that I've used Queen's College as an example. Your speaker may be a little biased because she went to Queen's College. But let's disregard that. But will we take away that stigma by renaming the schools? Because, for instance, the system in Japan for their middle schools is simply, you do not do an exam in elementary school. You go straight from elementary to the nearest junior high school. And then you sit an exam at the end of junior high to be placed in the specialty high schools, which sounds very similar to the system that Barbados wants to implement. So will they do the same? Will we be taking away exams? Will we change the names? Or will we just be allocating by location? We have to look at the issue of training. To adjust to a new curriculum, what we've heard so far is that the Barbados Secondary School entrance exam will be no more. And primary school teachers currently teach according to that exam. That is what the curriculum is largely based on. So what changes will be made to the curriculum? In terms of the secondary curriculum, because we now have junior academies and we're looking at academies of excellence, are we still going to use CSEP? Because now schools will be specialized. So do all teachers now need to be retrained to deliver this new curriculum if there is one? And just how will that retraining be done? So the retraining of teachers are concerned about when this will occur, because obviously this needs to occur prior to implementation, not during implementation. As we have seen with the remote learning, when we had COVID and we had to go into remote learning, teachers were literally flying the plane while building it. They were delivering instruction while training. They were teaching while still learning the online platform. Teachers are afraid of having the same situation here with education reform, where they're still learning and being trained while the new system is in place. So to ease transition, especially if we move towards inclusive classrooms, because if you're talking about specialist schools, does that mean that you're taking the students who would typically be in special units or special schools and allowing them to go into these specialist schools in the areas that they excel in? So if you're moving towards inclusive classrooms, then we definitely need more training, which brings me to my next area, special needs training. So will all teachers now be trained in special needs? Are we moving towards full inclusion? Or will you be looking to put special units in junior academies or academies of excellence? How are we going to be accommodating those with learning issues and those with disabilities? How are we accommodating them in this new education reform system that we're putting together? Obviously, there would have to be changes to Erdiston training. The Erdiston teaching training program would need to be revamped to meet the new needs of education. And again, it begs the question, everybody who's currently, who has current teacher training, will they need to be retrained at Erdiston? These are questions that are coming out as well. We look at the psychological impact. So if teachers are bombarded with sweeping changes in their work without any attention paid to human capital development, then their lack of preparation is likely to have a negative impact on the quality of schoolwork. Again, teachers are your major stakeholders. If they're unprepared, then it will impact the rolling out of this new reform. So they have to adjust to a new teaching community and social community. There's a psychological impact associated with any relocation. A teacher that's been in the school for decades, if you're just picked up and you have to leave and then adjust to a completely different culture, a different way of teaching, a different way of learning, that will have its challenges. We've talked about having transition programs for students. What about transition programs for the educators? And there would also be a change culture at those specialist schools, because we're moving from the broad education base to a narrow educational base. Teacher burnout, as we have already seen with the remote learning, the overload of work when changes come too soon. So if the changes are rushed, teachers will be overloaded with work. That will affect morale, and morale affects performance. And when the performance of teachers are impacted, the whole education system is impacted as well. There are limitations due to reduced year groups. Now, one of the speakers before spoke about the fact that teachers like to move. They don't necessarily want to always teach the junior group. They may want to move on to the senior group. With the junior academies, and the academies of excellence, they're very limited in the amount of years you have with students. So there's concerns about possible limitations for job promotion and limitations of movement, frustration because you cannot teach beyond a certain year level because the schools are now grouped in these two groupings. There's also the effect on student-teacher relationship because of the limited years. Teachers often look at students as being their own children, and they like to track their progress from first form right up until CSET. And those schools that have sixth forms, they like to track them right up until they have done CATE and they're about to go on to university. So teachers are concerned that they'll not be able to track their students. They won't be able to build the rapport, the relationships that they've had with students before because of the shortened time in these junior academies and academies of excellence. So there's less years to bond and reduced effect on the student-teacher relationships. These are concerns. There's also obviously the financial impact. Now, Ian would have mentioned before about the financial impact on pensions. Then there's also the financial impact of relocation. Like I said before, if you have to be moved because you have specialist qualifications to a specialist school, so for instance, a teacher that lives in St. Lucie is now moved to St. Philip, of course, that is going to impact your finances, especially with the price of gas since we've had the war in the Ukraine. And then the resources, and this has been spoken about previously.
2 minutes,
as
well.
2
2 minutes left.
Thank you. This has been spoken about previously as well. The resources for specialist schools. So if you are talking about narrowing and looking at special subject areas, these schools need to be outfitted with specialist resources, and teachers can become frustrated if resources are not forthcoming. Already, a lot of teachers, they pull their own pockets to bring supplies to the school. So there's a worry now that if you have a specialist schools and the funding is not forthcoming, that they will have to look to spend more money because specialist schools will need more funding. Will they get an adequate budget? How will this all be funded? Because we're talking about major sweeping change. Where are the funds going to come from? So this is a concern as well. So that brings me to the end. Like I said, it was a very brief presentation summing up what we have been told so far. So education reform is a process that must include teachers so that the mountain climbing is less arduous. And this quote comes from Tara Durant, 2022. I want to say, Yoroshiku onegaishimasu, arigatou gozaimasu, fulfilling Dr. Ian Marshall's request of speaking a little Japanese for you. I want to say, thank you for listening to my brief summary. I hope you have comments so that we can add to this in terms of the concerns and the implications that education reform will have for educators. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tara, and thank you for that Japanese expo. I think you made some very, very valid points. At this time, we're going to go into question time. I'm going to invite Rodney, who private messaged me to start the ball rolling. So over to you, Rodney. Thank you, Tara.
Hi, good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you quite well.
Awesome. I got cut off earlier. A lot of what Tara said is what I have echoed in a letter to the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Education through the Minister of Education. One of the things when we talk about reform, she pointed out, was resources. And we talk about resources, we have to look at our teachers. We have to make sure our teachers are properly trained. And when we talk about these schools in separation, how is that going to affect the broader aspect of the schools in terms of the sports and so on? I teach PE. So how would that come into play? We have to have, I believe, when we speak about specialists, we have to go specialists in terms of specific subjects, as I mentioned earlier, mathematics, language arts, science, art, forgot the other one. But once we get these things in place and we have our specialist teachers where we have our remedial teachers, especially our primary system, I think the main problem is having remedial teachers. Identifying the problems. We don't need to change up a whole bunch. We do not have the resources. We are complaining about money, proficiency. We need to have teachers who specialize in remedial education. Once we get that happening, when they move into the secondary system, with the schools who are geared towards that those programs to help children to bring them up to standard. Then we can push on, increase the age, which I think was proposed that's supposed to come into play, up to 18. Once we move in that direction, I think Barbados on a whole will do well. We talk about elitists.
30 seconds more.
Okay, I have two sons in Canada. One is exceptionally bright. Whether we like it or not, we have children who will excel, and there will be schools for them. We have children who are at the bottom. There are schools for them, and we need to make sure that we cater to those children.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have Paula Ann Moore, and then we have Dr. Colin Cumberbatch. Paula Ann Moore first, and then Dr. Cumberbatch, in that order.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you quite clearly.
Great. I had some challenges before. I just want to congratulate the BUT and the presenters for an excellent initiative. I think there's a public thirst to have this discussion and to move on to have a materialization of education transformation. Let me see if my video is working. Yes.
Yeah, we can see you.
Yes, great. I just want to say, preface by saying that I'm looking at this through the prism of being a parent, having some business management experience and expertise. And there seems sometimes to be a reluctance to look at education through a business prism. And what is being contemplated is a radical transformation of our national education system. That is a huge exercise. There's a lot of issues as it relates to project management, change management, and education and stakeholder engagement is key. And obviously, if you don't have parents, teachers, and students along, if we're not properly engaged, if we're not properly communicated with, any project that doesn't address those issues is doomed to failure. And I know that all of us at the end of the day, we have our students and children's best interests. We have that as the major objective. So there is what we would like as in a perfect world. And then we have the reality in terms of national economics. And my concern is what has been contemplated as it relates to the middle schools and the academies of excellence and what it would mean in the total reorganization of our education system. How realistic is it? And I just think that when we're looking at implementing this change, we need to look at it from a short, medium, and long-term implementation. We have a thing, sadly, as it
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
We have implementation deficit disorder. Anyone that has dealt with TAMIS knows the challenges we have in implementing that and our new driver's licenses. And my concern is that we focus a lot on the 11+. That is a convenient punching bag. But if we don't address what is happening at the primary school level and the secondary school level as it relates to what is needed in terms of specialist education and training for these children, I think that the situation is doomed to failure. And what I will end quickly by saying, if confidence in our education system is destroyed, I would hate that we end up with a scenario that there is a privatization of our secondary school system and we end up with the two-tier system that we're trying to avoid. We commented on Bermuda. Bermuda has 63,000 people and their GDP per capita is 10 times ours. And they have reorganized their education system. And from understanding my Bermudian friends, you end up with the private school system that tends to be the one that has the how does one put it delicately? Anyway, there is a distinction private school and the secondary school system. I would hate that we end up accelerating a situation between the have and have nots with the best will in the world.
Thank you very much. Dr. Colin Cumberbatch, let's hear you.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Just want to make a couple of comments in reference to Ms. Durant. She said that the Japanese went to middle school and pushed the exam 3 years down the road. To me, that doesn't make sense. That is kicking the bucket down the road. If you're going to move from a system of having common interest to just having the exam 3 years further down, to me, that is defeating the purpose. Now, I want to echo the sentiments of Mr. Adams as it relates to primary education. What we need to do is get primary education right. We need to invest a lot more in our primary educational system. A lot of the problems that are identified in secondary schools are readily recognized in primary schools. Unfortunately, the primary schools don't have the resources to deal with the challenges that they face. And that is something that needs to be addressed. And whether there is or isn't a common entrance exam, and primary schools are treated the way they are treated now, we will still have challenges.
Excellent point.
What we need to do is get primary education right. Now, as it relates to education reform, I'm really not prepared to make any comments on it, whether it's middle school, schools are excellent, whatever. I understand that there's a process that these things go through, the development of a green paper, which goes to cabinet and get cabinet approval, and then there is consultation. I may be wrong with that, but I think that that's how it was done when we had the last of the education reform, the EduTech, the white paper on education reform that came out in 2000, or was it 1995? Still gray in my head, but there's a process for this, and eventually there will be the type of consultations that I believe will be necessary as it relates to education reform. And
thank you. Oh, just 30 seconds.
Finally, I would like to advise Ms. Durant to be careful how she is using the logos of institutions in presentations. That is not something that you can do willy-nilly. You probably need to get the express permission of those institutions to engage in that manner.
Okay, thank you. And I see that Dr. Colin Cumberbatch has put on his administrative hat at this time. I'm going to go to Candace Griffith. Candace Griffith.
Good night, everyone. Good night, Mr. Chair. Good night to the panel. I was responsible for reading the chat and reporting in. One message I find very interesting is that from Walter Edie. He says that in all of our discussions, we have not addressed the important issue of the socialization of the students and their talents or abilities. So I don't know if we want to look at how all of this will affect the socialization of students.
Okay, on that score, of course, this is just, I call this a teaser, because obviously an issue of this magnitude cannot be dealt with in 1 2-hour session. So in subsequent sessions, we will obviously return and expand on some of those areas. But at this time, so I thank you for the comment. At this time, I want to give each panelist the opportunity to make his or her closing remark. And I will give you just 1 minute to do that in each instance. I'm going to call on Mr. Adams, first of all, to make your closing comments on the panel. Mr. Adams, thank you, Candace.
Well, I want to thank all the panelists for very well-prepared presentations. And also
1 minute, just 1 minute, 1 minute.
Yeah. I just want to say that we ought to listen to our children. And there are 2 commissions we didn't have the chance to go into, the Law and Order Commission and the Justice Research Planning Unit. And they interviewed the students, and the students gave very damning accounts of their experiences in our schools. And it said it started in the primary schools, and then it followed them into the secondary schools. some of those secondary schools, some 7 or 12 of them, they have responsible for producing criminals and things of that nature. This is where socialization comes in. But I think we ought to recognize that the primary school has 2 very important roles to play. One is the socialization program. It has a lot to do with children going to school where they live. And the other one is to be ensuring that the primary schools are well staffed, well resourced, and that even if you're not sending out brilliant students, you're sending out students who over the time of their time at school will be able to grow and develop. And that is not happening at the moment. The children are actually getting worse.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
Yes, I just think that we ought to look at those 2 commissions in particular and to find out that the children said that it is the allocation of low scores of students to so-called bad schools. That is a scourge. And they also said that it follows them through life. And whatever they do, they cannot shake it off.
Okay,
and that's a very serious indictment on our schools.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Adams. Very useful quotes there. Dr. Harris, over to you. 1 minute, starting now.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. This evening, I really want to congratulate everyone for the presentations that were done. But we are dealing with matters like the abolition of the common entrance exam and the implementation of middle schools. And these are the 2 issues that are before us with regard to reform. These are what we have heard in the public domain. And so this afternoon, we have looked at how we can offer alternatives to the common entrance examination and the impact of middle schools. I would say, in response to all those who spoke about the primary schools, that we are not operating in the 1960s, 1970s, or 1980s, but very often when you visit a primary school, it appears that way because many of the buildings are not in the best condition. We need resources in those schools, both human and physical resources, and matters that issues that occur in the primary schools need to be addressed speedily so that they do not escalate. And so all of these factors must be taken into consideration when we are looking at reform. Primary schools serve as the foundation of education.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. I know we move swiftly on to Yvette Simmons-Gemon. The floor is yours, Yvette.
Thank you. I had alluded to the fact that there were many parallels between the Bermudian experience and ours. And if I could just mention about 2 of them, Bermuda, like us, wanted to abolish their common entrance examination, and they did. And they saw the creation of middle schools as helping that process of being able then to move students to any school within their catchment area or whatever. I want you to know that Bermuda has committed to phasing out middle schools. They did not work in Bermuda, and they have committed to phasing them out and returning to the old system that they had, which is the 2-tier system. They're calling the signature schools now. A word to the wise, perhaps.
Okay, thank you, Yvette Simmons-Gemon. And we move now to Ian Marshall. Ian Marshall, your final comment, sir. 1 minute.
Yes, and very quickly, I want to give 3 solutions. I listened to Mr. Cumberbatch just now, and I, quite frankly, I'm tired of people talking about what we need to do. My solutions are, the Ministry of Education is top heavy. Redeploy the resources at the primary level. Social workers, remedial teachers, psychologists, counselors. We need those. We don't need a whole raft of education officers that, quite frankly, don't know what they're doing. Secondly, broaden and revamp the curriculum. Outdated in many aspects. Social studies, religious education. We teach Christian education. We don't teach religious education. I remember Mr. Farley talking about that years ago, talking about things that children are not prepared for when they move into secondary level, onto the secondary level. We need to broaden the curriculum and be more innovative. 3, decentralize the Ministry of Education, give schools, particularly primary schools, the opportunity to make decisions concerning their own operations. Secondary schools have boards. Too often, primary schools have to wait for years and years and however long for the ministry to make decisions that are vital in their well-being.
30 seconds.
We have a system in Barbados. We are very rigid in terms of class and race. And we have continued this over the years and to our detriment. So I want to end, Dr. Marshall, by using your analogy, pull down the system, pull it down, build it back up from scratch. Reform is timid and gradualistic. We have wasted enough time. Let's move forward. Thank you.
Excellent. On to Tara Durant. Let's go, Tara. 1 minute.
My closing remarks simply are that teachers should be engaged in this process. I think a lot of points have been raised here tonight, and I saw somebody wrote in the chat that special needs, they were glad I raised it because special needs is not being addressed in terms of the whole reform drive. In fact, inclusive classrooms are being forced upon them with no support. And I do agree that we have to look at special needs if we're going to talk about education reform. I don't really have much to add beyond that. And I thank everybody for coming out tonight.
And thank you, Burt. It is now 7 o'clock and I hand over to the president, Mr. Rudy Lovell, to close the session. Mr. President, over to you at 7:01.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marshall. I endorse everything that was said tonight, and we are very appreciative of the comments made by the general public and the members of the union. I think as a union, we have a responsibility to discuss this topic, very hotly debated topic of education reform, in order to get the opinions and the views of our members and the general public so that we can feed into any white paper when that time comes. We have been told that it will be coming. But most of what we have learned from the media, and we don't believe that we should have to wait to get information. So we are trying our best to get as much information as possible so that we can make our presentation when the ministry decides that they want to discuss education reform with the Barbados Union of Teachers. At this point in time, I would like to commend the members of the Education Reform Committee. The committee is very big. It's chaired by Dr. Ian Marshall. We have Sister Keisha Russell Graves, Mr. Alwyn Adams, Mr. Anthony Allen, the principal of Leicester One Secondary School, Ashley Yearwood, Candace Griffith, Sharice Rock, Dr. Hyacinth Harris, Ian Marshall Jr., Mr. John Goddard, Sister Marcia Burt, Paula Amore, who is the parent representative, Mr. Pedro Shepard, Mr. Stephen Jackman, Ms. Taryn Jordan, and Mrs. Yvette Simmons-Jammer. Thank you all, colleagues, for a job well done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back over to you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, all that is left for me to say is that see you again when we have round 2 of addressing the elephant in the room. Have a good evening all. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Good night, good evening. Interesting.
Good night, all. Thanks very much for attending and contributing.